This is The Guardian.
Hello and welcome to The Guardian Football Weekly. A couple of Premier League games to run you through. We'll discuss the glorious chip of Jean-Philippe Mateta and the caressed volley of Eberechi Eze and a Palace draw at the Emirates that doesn't mean a whole lot. But before that, a vital last-minute winner for Man City over Villa. Jeremy Doku with one of the passes of the season for Matheus Nunes to stick it away and make Unai Emery look very sad. Villa and Palace play this weekend in the FA Cup semi-finals with City taking on Forest in the other. We'll look ahead to those. We'll wonder for a very short time if Spurs can stop Liverpool getting the point they need to win the title at Anfield on Sunday. There's more race for fifth place stuff. Find out which player has walked the most in the Premier League this season. There's Gary Lineker versus the BBC on the BBC, Eni Aluko on Women's Hour, the incredible title race in the National League South, some support for Barry's dismissing all theatre thesis, your questions, and that's today's Guardian Football Weekly. On the panel today, Barry Glendenning, hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Seb Hutchinson.
Hello.
And Michael says, ask Dan Bardell why he's spending his honeymoon with Barry and yourself. Huge congratulations to you, Dan. When did you get married?
In Devon, in Ilfracombe.
No. When? I don't care.
Oh, when?
Monday.
Monday. Easter Monday.
And it's Thursday today. I mean, look, Barry has that magnetism. I was on the radio the day after I got married with Barry, not to Barry. It's important to point out. Well, look, congratulations. Do you have a nice time, Dan?
I did, yeah. It was absolutely wonderful, and the honeymoon is actually being spent at Wembley next week. Well, this weekend in the FA Cup semi-final. So romance is not dead.
Yeah, I saw some hashtags, some Instagram pictures. I enjoyed them. Anyway, we'll do Arsenal Palace in a second from last night, but first the game on Tuesday, key game in the race for fifth place. Manchester City 2, Aston Villa 1. Before we hear the agony from Dan, that assist from Jeremy Doku, Barry, is just so good.
Yeah, we all love a nice pass with the outside of the right or left boot. This came off the outside of Doku's right. He skinned Axel Disasi down the left-hand side and just slid this perfect ball through the corridor of uncertainty. And Matheus Nunes, who's getting a lot of coverage these days, for good or bad, was on hand to fire it in from quite a tight angle, actually. It wasn't as easy as it looked. As you alluded to in your intro, Unai Emery just looked very, very sad. Really sad. And I'd imagine Dan Bardell, despite being a happily newly married man, was also very, very sad.
It's a good question, actually, Dan. Did when Nunes put that away, did you have enough perspective saying, I've married the love of my life, not 24 hours ago, or had that all just dissipated?
No, I think I was pretty upset. I think I looked a little bit like Unai Emery when Nunes took that home. So frustrating, because I think once you get to that position in stoppage time, you've got to take a point. I didn't think Villa were great in the second half. I think they've caught Man City just as they've picked up a little bit. I think there was definitely better times in the season to travel to the Etihad. I think maybe I'd have been more upset had I not got married the day before, but I was still pretty upset, and seeing the look on Unai Emery's face, you just know how damaging that is to Villa getting the top five.
How many Aston Villa-based presents did you get, Dan?
You know what? I haven't seen a single present yet. I haven't seen, because our car wasn't big enough to carry everything back, so some of the gifts are with my wife's sister, who hasn't come back from Devon yet. So at the weekend, when I get back from Wembley, we might tuck into the presents.
Enormous gifts that just don't fit in the
giant.
I mean, anyway, to be honest, there was only 30 people at the wedding. It was a small wedding, so there won't be loads.
Seb, actually, I just one more on that Doku pass, because there was an angle from behind him, which makes you realise. Actually, I don't think many people, and he's not known as an end product guy, you know, and actually it's quite hard to even see Nunes, let alone get the right, it's sort of like a putt that he has to do.
It just seemed to take ages, and then looking at Dan's face at the moment, I just really feel for him, because in slow motion, obviously it makes it worse, but from the angle behind, you just feel it. Well, surely one Villa player is going to cut this ball out. One of them, one of the 4 or 5 who could have blocked it coming in, but it didn't. It was just right on the money, and Nunes is there arriving at the back post. It felt a very Manchester City goal, and I think a couple of the last time I was on, and for a few months now, I've just had this feeling that they were going to maybe even reel Arsenal in and finish second in the league. And looking at the fixtures left, I still feel that's a possibility, because they spent the money that they did in January. They looked to correct the issues that they had, and we know Guardiola is an elite coach, and they already have an excellent squad. So with it all coming together and the experience of knowing and winning, and that they were always going to be able to produce a run in a season in which teams have struggled to go on runs. I felt watching the game that Villa were living off moments in that match, and sometimes that can do for you. There was similarities in some respect to when they went to Paris and just couldn't quite last at the end. If they'd emerged with a 2-1 victory and taken it back to Villa Park, well, hindsight's amazing, but it would have felt so different, and you always felt they were ultimately chasing the game. In this one, I just thought Manchester City were at it. There were elements of them that made you think, oh, this is the Man City that we know. This is the Man City that basically was a level above everybody else. And in a season where they've dropped off, it's opened the door for somebody to power through. And Liverpool have done that. I said this the last time I was on about Aston Villa. I just think that ultimately whatever happens in this season, there will be tinges of disappointment, but it's still a phenomenal situation that they find themselves in. And it's something that from the outside, as the outside looking in, I just can't believe. I was at the playoff final against Fulham not that long ago, and to think where they are now, the players that are turning out for them, the performances of some of these players this season, and what Emery's done at times. And it's the nature of football. You put yourself in a position where you're close to something, you just miss out. It's galling. And I keep getting distracted by Dan's really sad face.
Well, I was wondering if Max was going to ask me about Doku's pass, because I don't think we've ever spent so long talking about a pass before. I don't think we've ever gone into such granular detail about a pass.
I would argue it wasn't even the best pass of the game, though, because Kevin De Bruyne had one which was also like a golf shot, not a putt, but more an approach to the green around a tree, that he put it on a plate for James McAtee, who almost beat Emi Martinez with with a lob that bounced the wrong side of the upright.
If it doesn't end in a goal, I don't even see it, Barry. That's a good point you make. Look, you're right about City's fixtures, Seb. Wolves at home, who are the best team in the world at the moment, but still, Southampton away, Bournemouth at home, Fulham away. That is quite a nice run-in. Pep he said, I'm really happy. If we win the next 4 games, this win will have been so important. You don't have to be scientists to realise that we play against Aston Villa, one of the best teams, as you saw against Newcastle and PSG, an extraordinary team. But we performed as we did in the past with commitment. I take it you're not a scientist, Dan. From a Villa point of view, right, that is the thing that Seb, I think, articulates it really well. You're so close to having a brilliant season. And yet it is so hard to retain the perspective if you fall short in the top 5, if you don't win the FA Cup, if you've gone out of the Champions League and you go, oh, but hang on, this was a great season, but it doesn't look like it when I look at everything.
Obviously, if Villa were to finish 6th, one place outside the Champions League, and then, let's say, be runners-up in the FA Cup final, you would, as a Villa fan, you couldn't help but be disappointed with that. But I think while still acknowledging that the progress that the club has made is absolutely sensational. Seb went back quite far to that Fulham game. Even the progress that's been made in the last 2.5 years since Unai Emery picked them up, I don't think a manager has ever really come in and lifted a team to the heights that he has in such a short space of time, to get Villa into the Champions League from 17th place from where they were when he picked them up. I suppose Ranieri at Leicester took them on an amazing run, obviously, for them to win the league, but that them excluded, Unai Emery has done an absolutely brilliant job. But the margins are just so fine in football, and I think Villa might look back on the first half of the season. I don't think they had a good summer now. Looking back, I think they rectified it excellently in January and really shaped the squad nicely and kind of dispelled the myth that you can actually do good business in January, because it's Villa's good business in January that I think has taken them to where they are today, and the fact that they can still qualify for the Champions League and they can still win the FA Cup. But they let so many silly games go in the first half of the season, and they were trying to adapt to playing Champions League and Premier League. We only took 2 points off Ipswich, for example, which, you only had to have won one more of those games, and our position would be so much healthier. But we're still in the fight. Top 5 is not an impossibility. Anything can happen in football. 4 games to go for us, 5 for some of the other teams around us. Teams can lose football matches. I didn't expect Villa to dismantle Newcastle in the way that they did at the weekend, and they did. So I don't think all's lost.
Yeah, so look, Villa are 7th on 57, having played a game more than Chelsea on 57, Newcastle 59, Forest 60. Forest and Newcastle occupying 4th and 5th. Man City have 61. They've also played 34 games. Look, Villa's running as well is actually not unpleasant, is it? Fulham at home, Bournemouth away, and then, presumably 2 wins at home to Tottenham and away to Manchester United, who, depending on when those semi-finals are, they'll either be like reeking in disappointment or resting all their players or a bit of both. There were a lot of empty seats at the Etihad. The empty seats for a big game last night tells its own story, said a spokesperson for the 1894 group, a fan organisation. Sadly, it's been a common theme all season. The root cause of all the issues at City is the overpricing. The club doesn't understand their own fan base. Not just that, but they'd rather try and manufacture fair weather supporters than nurture the ones who traditionally made us one of the best supported clubs in the country for well over a century. I mean, it's a story we've discussed before, Barry, and not just for Manchester City.
The tickets for this game were 71 quid for adults, 43 for children. I believe City are not currently selling season tickets, and it's something we've raised on the pod before, that season ticket holders are the lifeblood of football clubs, but increasingly elite Premier League football clubs are making it clear they'd probably prefer not to have season ticket holders at all, because season ticket holders go to the game, they don't spend money in the club shop, whereas tourists come, pay for their ticket, and then spend a fortune in the club shop, spend a lot more money. They could, spend upwards of $1,000 on an afternoon out at the Etihad, the Emirates, Old Trafford, wherever. Unfortunately, it's the owners of the clubs that call the shots. And as much as they would like to have a big say in what goes on, season ticket holders and fans in general are increasingly marginalised.
It's probably something we should touch on a bit more at some point in detail. But, there must be an idea, there must be a way of saying, we reserve 1,000, 2,000, whatever, for, tourists. I don't know what the numbers should be. And, this is for the people who come week in, week out, because it is so short-termist, isn't it?
Interestingly, Pep did row in behind the supporters' protest and said he's very much on their side. He did make the point that obviously he doesn't have to pay for tickets, but that when he pays to go to the theatre, if I pay a lot of money for something, I expect value for money, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I just think it's always important to raise that point as well, that, half our listeners are around the world. A lot of them dream of going to one Premier League game, who might watch these games in, ridiculous times of day, and, are still very committed fans. So it's a tricky balance. To the Emirates then, Arsenal 2, Crystal Palace 2. Surprisingly good game, Seb, between two teams whose priorities are clearly elsewhere, and the Palace goals were both so good.
We talked about taking your opportunities with Villa and it being a moment's game, and that's what it felt like for Crystal Palace. They were, how would I say, we know they have individual talents who can be match winners, and they've been coming off a couple of games away from home where they've been thrashed, essentially. Yesterday, it was a very odd match to watch from just the point of view of thinking, what does the result matter to this? Does it matter at all? I'd actually think the drop points matters more to Arsenal ultimately in the grand scheme of things, because I think they could easily, in the games they have left, stumble to a couple of defeats, a couple of draws, especially if they progress in the Champions League. And then all of a sudden they could find themselves, not to say they'll drop out of the top 5, but they could find themselves in a situation where they are behind Man City and potentially another side. But to go back to Crystal Palace, so much talk about them having a semi-final this weekend, and I heard it was touched upon in the commentary, in that if you're a supporter of Crystal Palace, this weekend is everything.
Yeah.
Is everything. Because we've been through this before, this idea that you're not in this position often. And I know Palace have been in FA Cup finals before, but again, it's a generational situation. And to have that on the horizon, in a weird way, yesterday just felt like a just a fuck it. Do you know what I mean?
The technical term.
And both finishes had an element of that to them. Because Eze, I remember after he scored, he just went, sod it. And he put his foot through the ball, went in off the post. And then the second one, Saliba, who I guess he's had this recently, he's played so many games and he's needed to be fit all season, and he has been fit. And the lapses in concentration, you feel like they're bound to happen at some point. But even Mateta, I'm not sure that if it's a game that Palace needed to win, that he would have even tried that. I think he would have taken an extra touch, maybe tried to be sure of his finish a bit more. But when you're in true fuck it mode before the Wembley semi-final, then you're free, aren't you? You're free to express yourself. And Arsenal, I felt there was a tightness. Nobody wants to get injured. No one wants to put in... We know they're an intense side. And ultimately, they're a side that have just drawn too many games this season. And they're arguably the toughest side to beat in the league in many ways. But they don't have enough match winners going forward and depth in their squad, which is what we saw from Manchester City. I still don't think Arsenal have that.
They've lost 3 out. Liverpool have lost 2. But yes, both hard to beat, aren't they? I mean, the awareness of Mateta, Barry, and like the technique, the ball's behind him. You can see the backspin. Everything about it is joyous.
Yeah, it's a brilliant chip, and I really loved Seb's analysis of the Palace goals, because I think he's probably right. It hadn't crossed my mind, but yeah, would Mateta have tried that if there was more at stake? I don't know, but I'm glad he did try it, and perfect execution, brilliant chip, and you could see how pleased he was that it came off for him. I'm glad for him. I'm glad he's come back from that injury. I know it was only stitches, only in inverted commas, but it was a frightening challenge, and he could be forgiven for being more timid and reserved while he finds his way back into the game after that spell out. But he's playing well, apart from one game where he got hooked at half-time and Oliver Glasner really got stuck into him after, which I thought was a little bit harsh, but there you go. I kind of expected this game to be a draw. I thought it might be a 0-0 and just a very much don't get injured derby ahead of more important games for both sides.
Yeah, a bit of a shame, Dan, that Eze's bounces on the way in. I think that takes away from a volley. I don't know if that's harsh or maybe just the aesthetics of it. I think if that goes straight in off the post, I'm elevating the quality of the strike, which is perhaps unfair.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be too upset. I think he'll be quite happy that it went in. I mean, hopefully he's not saving cleaner strikes for the weekend. I'm hoping Crystal Palace have got their sensational finishing out the way before Wembley on Saturday. But just back to Mateta. Mateta is such a good centre forward. Like, This time last year, he was banging in the goals for Crystal Palace. Since Glasner's come in, his record in front of goal is absolutely incredible. And on their day, Palace are a really, really fun team to watch. They've got a lot of fun players. They play a really fun system with wing-backs that not many teams play. And you've got to be wary of them. And Arsenal kind of took their foot off the pedal a little bit for obvious reasons. And Palace have got players that can hurt you. But I actually don't think... I think that result and the way Palace came back into the game, I actually think that will give them a lot of feel-good and do them a lot of good going into Wembley at the weekend. So although it was a bit of a nothing game, I think the way it's ended for Crystal Palace is actually a really good thing for them, because it just kind of gives them a little bit of feel-good and a little bit of momentum ahead of Saturday.
Oh, the terror. Look at the terror in Dan's face. Yes, Seb?
I just had this image of Dan watching the last couple of games, just strolling up and down, and his new wife saying, "What's the matter with you? What's the matter? Was the wedding really that bad?"
Yeah.
I just think,
aren't you happy?
Yeah. But the FA Cup will change all that. Yeah,
you never know. Like Trossard takes his goal really well, especially taking the pass from Timber, which was hit at about 200 miles an hour, and he is in really good form and probably starts against PSG. I reckon, given that Partey is suspended and Marino would go a bit deeper. And Dean Henderson made a great save from Saka at one point.
I think Jacob Kiwior deserves a bit of praise for his goal as well, because
he's been
that
good.
Was a sensational header from around the penalty spot, wasn't it? And to beat Dean Henderson from that distance was a bit special, I thought, that goal.
No, you're absolutely right. I did have that in the script I just was
sorry.
pootling through. No, I was going to ignore it. So, that's my anti-Arsenal bias there. Alex says, does the pod think that Nicholas Jover's role extends to orchestrating a guard of honour? If so, will Arsenal look to block the likes of Van Dijk and Konate? Or will they line up somewhere other than the halfway line? We'll find out, I reckon. Anyway, we'll stick with Palace and Villa and City and do an FA Cup semi-final preview in part 2. Welcome to part 2 of the Guardian Football Weekly. So then Palace, Villa at 5:15 on Saturday, Forest City at 4:30 on Sunday, the FA Cup semi-finals. Aston Villa's last major trophy, the League Cup in 96. Is that Savo Milosevic? It sounds like it, almost 30 years ago. Got to the FA Cup final in 2000 and 2015. Palace have never won a major trophy. Producer Joel, Charlton fan, puts in brackets, and long may that continue. FA Cup runners-up in 1990, where they robbed Cambridge in the quarter-final, of course. And producer Joel writes 2916, i.e. in what? 900 years' time. But 2016. So how are you feeling, Dan?
Nervous. I find with Wembley. I don't think I've been loads because I'm a Villa fan, obviously, but I've never been there and massively enjoyed myself. I find that they're more nervy affairs, and I feel like kick-off time adds to it a little bit, having to wait till 5:15. So I'll be there all day. I'm just waiting for this game to kick off at 5:15, which is absolutely huge for generations of Villa fans who many won't have seen Villa lift the FA Cup. Those that were alive will be pretty old now because it was 1957 that the last time Villa lifted that trophy. This is huge for all the strides Villa have made and the run in the Champions League and qualifying for Champions League last season and potentially this season as well. To me, this FA Cup semi-final and potentially final if we get there, this is what the Villa fans really, really want. They really, really want a trophy. They want kind of Unai Emery's reign to be signified by getting a trophy. We feel it's like kind of deserved for what he's done. He's already going to go down in folklore because he's a brilliant, brilliant manager. We all really, really want this, and sometimes when you really, really want something, you don't get it, and that scares me.
Who starts up front for you?
I mean, I do preview shows obviously on my own podcast for Villa every week, and every week I get the team selection wrong, and every week I get the striker that he picks wrong. So you're probably best off asking Seb or Barry, but I think it's probably Rashford. Which is harsh on Ollie Watkins given everything he's given to the club, but it just seems that Rashford is the go-to guy at the moment and the striker that Emery favours. I thought Rashford was really good in the first half against Man City, caused them problems, and on that Wembley pitch, I think he'll plump for Rashford, but it's probably a coin toss.
Yeah, what do you think, Seb?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Watkins didn't start against Manchester City, because when I think about maybe the effectiveness he had against Newcastle was often the fact that we know when Newcastle get their defenders trying to step out, he's a striker that doesn't leave centre-halves alone, whereas it's something that Rashford does do. I mean, he does let people run off him, and he does let defenders bring the ball out under not much pressure from him. So I thought maybe against Manchester City he might play Watkins, but then maybe he thought it was going to be a moments game and that Rashford would be that moments player and take that opportunity. I think if Watkins doesn't start in that semi-final, I think it's almost guaranteed to me that he won't be at Villa next season. I mean, there's probably a feeling of that anyway. And ever since the Arsenal bid in the winter transfer window, it has felt that was a distraction for him. It's a massive distraction for somebody who obviously has is a supporter of Arsenal ultimately as a boy. We can overcomplicate these things. It can be just as simple as that, and maybe that's been reflected in training and around the ground. I don't know, because he was a favourite of Emery. We know that Emery has almost conditioned him to be a player to play between, to be more of a penalty box striker, and he's talked about that being important for his game. But I think bringing in a player like Rashford in January for Emery, he looks at Rashford and thinks, he is the elite player. He is the level to me. He's the star for me, and he should start.
Yeah, I suppose the tricky thing is they might end up with neither of them next season, because you could, upset Ollie Watkins and then not afford Rashford, or he decides to go somewhere else. I don't know. Meanwhile, Baz, Palace, a lot of neutrals willing Palace, because they have an amazing fan base. Lots of clubs have amazing fan bases, and to have never won a trophy, and to think, okay, Villa, they've got a good record against Villa. They've got a good team. We've already talked about it. They've got good, exciting players. Glasner's a great manager. Obviously, Man City are still in this tournament, so they are the favourites. But just the chance to get there, to get to another final. I mean, I just can't imagine the terror of being a Palace fan between now and kick-off.
Presumably no different to the terror of being an Aston Villa fan or a Forest fan. City fans are more used to it. I'd see this as a completely open game. I couldn't even begin to pick a winner. Both sides are eminently capable of beating each other. I could see this one going all the way to penalties, maybe. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not leaning towards either side, really. I normally, if I'm watching a game, I usually want one team to win more than the other, but not in this one.
That's disappointing to hear. That is, I'd like to have thought I'd have made a little bit of an impact on you in the last year, but obviously not.
Sorry, Dan, but I do live in South London. You know, I know quite a few Palace fans, and
with games like that, Barry, I think I'm in neutral, and then as soon as it kicks off, I know. So right, I think I'm supporting Palace actually. So I don't think I'll have that. But occasionally I go into a game where I'm completely neutral.
Now Dan's got looking sad again.
have I been asked on this podcast today as a joke?
No, like it's okay. Like we can still be friends. I talk to lots of Crystal Palace. Some of my best friends. Just checking. Actually, I don't think any of them are. But you take my point.
I was going to say that I was thinking ahead and thinking who would be most likely to beat Manchester City in a final, and I would have said Villa, but then obviously they played Man City not that long ago and they didn't beat them. So I'm in a bit of but nor did Palace. So I don't really know. I get quite connected with how fans feel about their team whenever I'm commentating on games. And that's why this season I felt once it got to that stage where there were all those teams left that you felt it was huge for them to win the FA Cup and Manchester City was still in there. Just within me, I just felt that for all those teams it would be amazing. And I still feel the same. For Villa, Palace and Forest, it's a game changer. It'll be a day they'll be talking about for years to come. I think if I was to ask you, when did, name all of Manchester City's cup wins in the last, decade, you wouldn't be able to name all those dates. But you know the year that Leicester won the title. You know that year. And for clubs that don't get to share in those prizes that often, it's a joy beyond anything really. And Dan touched on it. He said that even the thought, the hope that we might be in the fight, that we might win this trophy is excruciating. Whereas I think for City fans, it's more sort of, okay, we win it, but it's still not been a good season because ultimately we didn't win the Champions League and we didn't win the league. And that's the difference.
Yeah, and expectations change so quickly, right? That's such an interesting part of being a football fan, especially if you go on such a successful journey. I mean, I think we know how Forest City will look. If Villa get through, the Villa fans will be absolutely like, I don't know how Villa have done against Forest, but like the desperation for Forest to win just to make this game feel just like more possible. But from a neutral perspective, like, is it a question, Barry, of, Alanga and Hudson-Odoi versus kind of whichever attacking midfielder Pep puts at fullbacks? Because we know Man City will have the ball for 99% of this game and Nuno won't care. But they are so good on the break, Forest.
And I hope they score first in this game, whatever the outcome, because that'll make it really interesting. I do think Forest have it in them to beat City. I'm trying to think what the results of their games were this season, but I can't remember.
Well, they beat them. They beat them at the City ground.
They got battered away from home at the Etihad. But they did win the other way, didn't they?
But City do seem to have hit their stride. I think they were a little bit lucky to beat Villa on Tuesday. I think a draw would have been fair there. But Pep's team selection was a bit odd for that game. He has been getting grief from fans, I think, over his love of picking too many midfielders. James McAtee started the game against Villa, and I think while he's a perfectly good player, they have better wingers than him. And the team that finished against Villa was a lot better, I think, than the team that started against Villa. So one presumes Jeremy Doku will probably start in the semi-final. Again, I'm looking forward to the game. I have a feeling City will probably win, but I think everyone wants Forest to win apart from City fans, don't they? And I don't think there's any harm in saying that.
Interestingly, Dan...
Or Leicester fans and City fans.
Yeah, fair. And Notts County fan.
And Derby fans.
And Derby fans. Okay, so everybody, right? The Midlands. Nuno has occasionally left those attacking wide men on the bench and been a bit more sort of solid in the middle. He did it against Brighton in the FA Cup, I seem to think. And people were like, is that a weakened side, or is that kind of part of his plan to kind of release them late? I mean, I've gone to Dan, but Seb has his hand raised. So I'm happy to, if you're happy to defer, Dan, I don't want to take this question away from you.
I'll pass on.
Yeah, I was just going to butt it because I covered the game on Monday, Forest at Spurs, and I thought it was a template Forest win in many ways, but there was an element of concern. I think relentless pressure that Forest invite in games sometimes. I just feel with Manchester City, they're fine with that. They will. I could imagine on a Wembley day there'll be tension in the Forest players, and I just think Manchester City having that ball for large periods, and they look better at closing out the counter attack now than they did before. And I think Villa are an excellent side at breaking as they should do to try and get through and cause issues, and they probably would have wanted to do that more. And I did think that. I felt it with Manchester. When they apply that squeeze on teams, there's not many that have been able to resist it. And I think they're back into that squeeze mode where you think you're watching and you think this game's quite dull, there's not much really going on, but you always fear that they're in control of things. And I do worry for Forest in that regard. But there is huge confidence in so many of the players. They've had so many players with standout seasons. There was some performance on Monday. I thought for me, Elliot Anderson has great qualities and qualities that not many players in the Premier League have. He can play in multiple positions in the midfield area. And we also know that Gibbs White is as a rarity in the league in that number 10, but the way he plays that role is rare. And then Chris Wood, he's given a chance, he takes the chance. And they have proper wingers and proper wide players, and Elanga's delivery is excellent. So if they can find a way of just having a bit more of the ball somehow, I know Nuno doesn't care. If they can get to a penalty shootout, I'll back them all day long.
While we have you here, Seb, I was watching a game. I'm pretty sure you were commenting.
No, I wasn't. No, I don't think it was. Actually,
I can't remember what it was. But you said at the start that we should keep an eye on one of the goalkeeper's socks. And I was thinking, what's going to happen?
That was Arsenal Brentford. Actually. Yeah, so basically David Raya had to change his goalkeeping socks because the Brentford socks are similar colour to Arsenal's goalkeeping socks. So Arsenal were actually told a week before that they would have to change their socks. But on the day when we were told this, I did laugh to myself. I thought, it's one of those things where often when you're commentating, I'm commentating for Sky, but Sky are almost doing the world feed coverage because they are the host broadcaster. And you have commentators from, say, around the world and also other English-speaking feeds where you sometimes feel like, okay, we sort of have to cover this because people are talking about it. The club's mentioned it to us. And so let's get it out there and let's make a point of it. I also think with a game like that, which felt very similar to the game yesterday against Palace, is you're trying to cling on to something. You want something to talk about.
Well, I spent the whole game staring at David Raya's socks, and nothing
it worked.
really happened. They stayed in place. I thought maybe as he got like flashing lights
they'd
on
fall
them.
down. And also, I don't think black socks aren't out of the ordinary, are they? I think he's probably worn black socks at some point in his life.
Anyway, to the Premier League, Liverpool will win the title at Anfield with a draw against Spurs, who are A, not very good, and B, have a European semi-final on Thursday. Dan, feels like a lovely game to win the title.
They're going to, aren't they? It's going to happen.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I am
Could
sure
they?
of that. I'm more sure about that than I am about the FA Cup at the weekend. I think Liverpool, it would just top off a brilliant season. We mentioned earlier that they've only lost two games. That's an incredible achievement, only losing 2 games of football across the Premier League season, and to have the title wrapped up with a few games to spare as well. I think most people had Liverpool in their top 3 at the start of the season, but not many would have had them in the top 1. And I think the job that Slot's done, the fact that did Barry call it?
It's very relentless pointing at himself on a Zoom call just to help the listeners. Barry did call it. Yeah, he did.
Oh, well, I take it back then. very few people other than Barry would have called Liverpool to win the league at the start of the season, and to do it with the lack of transfer activity. I think the contract wrangles that have hung over the club all season as well. I think they played some brilliant football at times, controlled football, to have had to have followed Jurgen Klopp as well. I just think there's an amalgamation of reasons why it's such a fantastic title victory for Liverpool. And the last time they won the Premier League, nobody really got to celebrate it because it was COVID. And I'm really, really pleased that the Liverpool fans will get to see their team lift the Premier League, because they've waited a long time for it, and that puts them on 20, doesn't it? As well as that 20 titles, it puts Liverpool on. I know that stuff's really, really important with Manchester United, and at the moment you'd back them to get to 21 before Manchester United do.
What's the dream way for Liverpool to win this, Barry? In recent weeks we've had Van Dijk and then Trent scoring late winners. Surely it's Mo Salah's turn.
I don't think anyone will care. It's a bit of a shame, actually, that their game is on the same time as Forest City, so everyone who's not a Liverpool fan will be watching the other game, you'd imagine. Not that doesn't mean this one's going to fly under the radar or anything. I could see them doing an absolute demolition job on Spurs on Sunday. I'd imagine no end of Liverpool players could get on the score sheet in this game. Although it would be highly amusing if Spurs did actually manage to rouse themselves and win.
Extraordinary. I think Matt Law on the Telegraph was reporting that, Ange is set to leave whether they win the Europa League or not. But anyway, we can get into that. I think I said on the last pod that Salah hadn't signed a new contract when he has signed a new contract. I blame the huge production team for not noticing these glaring factual errors that come out of my mouth. I can't be held responsible. The huge production team blame me meddling with the script while they're asleep. So, this is the war that is happening right now. But yeah, apologies for that. Race of the top five. Newcastle at home to Ipswich. That seems nice, Seb, doesn't it? For the team to bounce back after the Villa hammering.
Perfectly. It's amazing the responses to one defeat. I mean, Newcastle are arguably the informed side in the Premier League before they faced Aston Villa, and then all of a sudden the question marks come back, and I think they've gone 7 straight games playing the same starting 11. There was a consistency to their play. They were difficult, but I just think Villa did a number on them in this one. So for their point of view, this feels, you couldn't wish for a better opponent really this weekend. I know there's Leicester and Southampton, but I feel with Ipswich, fresh off the game against Arsenal, I mean, they were totally outclassed. The gulf was huge. And this is for an Arsenal side we say are sort of going through the motions in the league. The Champions League race it's almost pointless taking points game by game. I think we're going to have to, I know we have to react, but I don't think
just wait until the end, right?
Yeah, just wait until the end and then let's just not talk until then. But I think you still got to look at Newcastle and say that they're an impressive side. Whatever happened in the Villa game, everybody has days like that. And we're starting to look, I think of all the teams involved down to Villa, Forest's games are going to feel like cup finals every single time. I don't feel like any game, even when they're at home to Leicester, they're not going to feel comfortable because they're not a side who, and they have found it against Everton, they're not a side who will progressively force themselves and dominate the opposition, which means when they're playing sides in the bottom half of the table, and they have dropped a fair number of points, Forest, against sides in that part of the table, that it's tense, and the City ground's going to feel tense, and they're going to feel that that they can get over the line because it's so huge for them. So I do worry slightly to an extent, even though they are still in a good position. Newcastle, I'm confident. I'm confident they'll finish above Chelsea, and I feel like they'll finish above Villa, and that will be enough, won't it?
That's enough. Yeah. Chelsea are currently 6th. They're home to Everton. Forest next game in the league, home to Brentford on Thursday. Elsewhere, Manchester United being linked to Mateus Cunha. They go to Bournemouth. He's expected to leave at the end of the season, has a £62 million release clause in his contract. Sky did put up a great stat that will excite United fans. Most time spent walking. Premier League this season until March the 23rd. Percentage of time walking. Ezri Konsa in 5th. Adama Traore 4th. Christian Romero 3rd. Virgil van Dijk 2nd. Mateus Cunha 77.6% of the time walking. Is this a totally misleading stat? I mean, I don't think you want Adama Traore jogging about, racking up Ks and not having the energy to go on a big sprint. And does it include standing still? Like, where's standing still in this line of statistics?
It's encouraging for Baz's half marathon, though. The statistics
Yeah,
are very
absolutely
encouraging.
right. Yeah. How is that going, Barry?
I said I wouldn't be taking questions.
Noted.
I have an app. I do what the app tells me. Nothing more, nothing less.
All right.
It should be fine.
United would need to sell players to raise the money for the purchase. They're also being linked to Liam Delap, who has a 30 million release clause if brackets when Ipswich are relegated. Feels like for 30 million, Dan, that would be a bun fight.
Yeah, there'd have to be a lot of teams going in for him. He's made a huge impact for Ipswich this season, a team that doesn't create many chances. He's got himself into double figures, I think, that Liam Delap in his maiden season in the Premier League. So I think there'd be a lot of teams that could do a lot worse than looking at Liam Delap. The interesting one for me, and I don't know whether they've been heavily linked, is if Forest do qualify for the Champions League, they're going to need another striker. They won't be able to just rely on Chris Wood. I think he'd be a great fit for Forest. I think he'd also, Delap would be better off going to Forest than entering the basket case clubs that are Chelsea or Manchester United. I think going to play for Forest in the Champions League would be a great move, but I'd imagine there'd be teams abroad, 5 or 6 Premier League teams. There'd be a lot of interest in Delap, especially at 30 million. When you look at what Manchester United paid for Højlund, who'd never played in the Premier League, 30 million for someone who has scored goals in a real poor side this season. I think it's a snip.
Jamie Vardy's apologised to Leicester fans for the club's relegation, labelled his own season a total embarrassment. Collectively, as players and as a club, we failed. There's simply no hiding. I refuse to entertain any suggestion of doing so. Having been at this club for so long, we've experienced so many highs and successes, and this season has been nothing but miserable. For me personally, a total embarrassment. It hurts, and I know you're feeling it too. To the fans, I'm sorry. Sorry we haven't performed. Sorry we end the 2025 season with such a shit show. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We heard full crew coming out and saying it. Now Vardy. I don't know which is the next Premier League striker to refer to their own size as shit before the end of the season. Producer Joel suggests Richarlison is high up on that. It's possible. What do you make of Vardy's comments, Baz?
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't say anything we didn't already know, but I suppose he could have just said nothing. I actually think Leicester should have sold him to Arsenal or Manchester United in January. I think he could have done a job for Arsenal or Man U. And it was abundantly clear Leicester were going down with or without him. He hasn't had a good season. He's got no service in a terrible team. Contract's up at the end of the season, I think. I don't know what will happen to him next. Does he have the legs to get a 1-year deal from someone in the Premier League? I don't know. He deserves a bit of credit for fronting up, but we all know Leicester's season has been.
That's true. Feels very Wrexham to me. Could he be the next Wrexham guy? You could see that. Anyway, that'll do for part 2. Part 3, we'll touch on Gary Lineker's interview with Amal Rajan. Welcome to part 3 of the Guardian Football Weekly. So let's talk about that Gary Lineker interview then. He did it on the BBC with Amal Rajan. Barry, you wanted a word on this. I mean, the most extraordinary revelation, I thought, was that he'd sometimes come home from school and find Engelbert Humperdinck playing cards with his dad. But there were other parts to this interview.
Yeah, I remember back in my shoot reading days as a kid, didn't Lineker's father famously run a fruit and veg stall in Leicester?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then Lineker was good friends with Willie Thorne, the snooker player, because Lineker's a very good snooker player as well. Topical as the World Championship's on at the moment. I'm enjoying it immensely. He seemed very D-mob happy in this interview, and he's clearly a man with no shits left to give about anything. And why would he? Because he's in his 60s, he's financially set for life, he's raised his kids, and he's got a podcasting empire that's raking him in millions of pounds. So I thought he made a very good point insofar as he can't understand why the BBC hierarchy constantly pander to their most vociferous critics, like, say, the Daily Mail and the Express, right-wing press, because he says there's no point pandering to them because they will continue to criticise, so you're better off just ignoring him. But he was muzzled by the BBC because they were afraid the comments he was making about immigration and refugees would enrage the Daily Mail and other parts of the right-wing press. And they did enrage them, but if they hadn't been enraged about that, they'd have been enraged about something else pertaining to the BBC. So he said that, and Amal Rajan asked the right questions. I got the impression that Amal Rajan kind of agreed with everything he was saying, but was obliged to perform the role of company man. And also, Amal Rajan is probably not as well fixed in life as Gary Lineker, so he has to watch his back.
I mean, I thought it was just sort of, it just comes across, and I've occasionally, crossed paths with Gary Lineker, and I mean, look, we're both woke lefty snowflakes, aren't we? So, like, of course, we share the same political space, but I just find myself generally agreeing with what he says.
Yeah,
and it's sort of deeply uncontroversial views about the world, and I suppose it's sort of interesting when you see the cultures. I've written a column about this, about, you do the interview and then it goes into these places and you see like alt-right YouTubers saying, this guy is a complete moron. And then you see other people saying, he's killed the BBC. And yeah, you're right. It's just a guy who happened to be really good at football, really good at talking about football, really good at TV presenting, who cares about cares about humans, who's now doing really well doing something else. I don't know. I mean, I don't. That was my sort of general view about it. And also, there's some lovely bits in that interview about 86 and all those stuff. And it appears like obviously they're not the headline grabbing things. In other interview news, Eni Aluko was on Women's Hour, and a lot of the headlines have been about what she said about Ian Wright and male broadcasters talking about the women's game. She was there to talk about Joey Barton and the abuse she received. She's won the first stage of a High Court libel campaign against Joey Barton arising from posts on social media. Barton is yet to respond to the ruling on the meaning of his posts. He could appeal against it. He could also defend the statements if the case goes to trial. It's very interesting listening to her talking about the effect of the abuse that she received, the fact that she didn't want to go out in public, the fact she sometimes wore disguises in public. Those are, it's sort of deeply depressing what she has had to go through. There was then a question about the opportunities for female broadcasters in the men's game and the women's game. And she was specifically asked, she said, lots of men work in the women's game. And the host, Claire McDonald, brought up Ian Wright, to which she said, I've worked with Ian Wright a long time. I think he's a brilliant broadcaster. I think he's aware of just how much he's doing in the women's game, i.e. the amount of work he's doing. I think he should be aware of that. There is a limited amount of state spaces available. If we had a situation there was an equal opportunity in the men's game for broadcasters and coaches that there is in the women's game, it's a free-for-all, but that's not the case. I can't dominate the men's game in a way that, used Ian as an example. She also brought up Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher as an example. When asked to clarify if she thinks it's wrong for Wright to be covering women's football, Aluko added, I don't know about wrong, but I think we need to be conscious and we need to make sure that women are not being blocked from having a pathway into broadcasting in the women's game. I'm very conscious that we have 4 men on a podcast talking about women in the women's game, and she was talking on Women's Hour, and we will talk about this again when we often have women on the panel. We have definitely increased the number of women that talk on Football Weekly, and we love that. Seb, you are a man who works a lot in the women's game as well, so you are much closer to this than the rest of us. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't feel quite right for us as a group of all men to discuss the issue of female representation in football in general. But what I do feel is important to point out, as someone who covers, women's football, is that people appreciate allies. And whether it sits right or not, people who are marginalised in any field need support from what you'd say is the, dominant class. And Ian Wright has been at the forefront of that in women's football, and he's been a net benefit to the growth of the game. And from Eni's angle, I think she's been abused and left isolated. As someone who's prepared to speak out and challenge many issues, and we know that social media is a cesspit of abuse. We know it's full of people who jump on a bandwagon or sometimes just drive the wagon itself if they think it will help their own lives in some way. And she wasn't prepared to stay out of the wasp's nest, I would say, out of her own principles, which is ultimately a brave thing to do.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out as well that I messaged a few of our female panelists about whether we should talk about it, and they all said, yeah, you should definitely talk about it. And they talked about allies as a key one, and I'm minded to agree with you. It's not my space, but I think what Ian Wright has done for the women's game and the profile that he has and his absolute love for it and the way he treats it completely equally to the men's game, I think is incredible, and has probably brought a lot of men with him who were sceptical about the women's game. Is and so that's like I said, we will talk to female panelists about this story when they're next on. But thank you, Seb, because you were sort of put in a slightly tricky situation by that happening the day before you came on the pod. Norwich City sacked their manager Johannes Hoff-Thorup 30 seconds after we published Tuesday's podcast, which featured a long conversation on the benefits of keeping on Norwich manager Johannes Hoff-Thorup, and even saying, let's hope he stays on for the rest of next season till we find out how successful he is. It was the closest to podcast published to manager being sacked. But one Norwich fan said, we didn't even merit a voice note. So, my apologies for that. Reading have agreed terms with a buyer over the sale of the club. The Football League have extended the deadline to complete the deal to the 5th of May. It's the second time the EFL's given the Royals more time to complete a sale since owner Dai Yong was disqualified under its owners and directors test. So look, fingers crossed for everybody that goes through. Harry says, hi Max and Barry, this might be slightly off most people's radars, and rightly so, but the final day in the National League South calendar promises to be a tense one. No fewer than 6 teams can win the title on the final day, including my beloved Torquay United. Barry, you have been looking at this. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I had to write about it yesterday. So National League South, which is the 6th tier of the pyramid. Truro City are top of the table. Truro from Cornwall. So they're the most southerly team in the National League South, which is the 6th tier of the English Football League pyramid. Behind them are Torquay United from Devon, the second most southerly team in the National League South. They're level on points, but they've 2 goals worse off. And then you've Eastbourne Borough and Worthing on 85 points, so they're 1 point behind. And behind them are Boreham Wood and Dorking Wanderers, who are 3 points off the pace. But interestingly, they both have a significantly better goal difference than Truro City. So we go into the final day of the season, and 6 of the 24 teams in the league can still win the title. So that's very exciting. I was wondering, when the Premier League is up for grabs on the final day and they've a helicopter ready to deliver the trophy to the ground.
Yeah.
So I got my map of the south of England out, and using drawing pins and bits of red string, I discovered that to maximise fuel efficiency, the helicopter needs to be parked in Ilchester in Somerset, the equidistant from all the grounds that are hosting those those 6 games.
It almost makes a mockery of the National League, that stage being split geographically, doesn't it? Really, when you think about it.
But I spoke to Charlie Baker yesterday, a big Torquay fan, and he's not at all bitter about Truro's imminent title win, and said he wishes them well on their 450-mile each-way trips to Hartlepool, Carlisle and Gateshead next season in the middle of October and November.
Well, thank you to Harry for getting in touch on that. He says, love the pod. We'll be back in touch when I get my inevitable vasectomy. Greg finally says, hello, I was pleased to hear in the recent episode of Barry's dislike of the theatre. I too dislike the theatre, but my partner and soon-to-be wife, hi Toria, cannot understand my view about it. I've explained that I've been to the theatre enough times to know that I don't like it, and no matter what she says, won't change my mind. Could Barry please explain to Toria why the theatre is rubbish, so I don't have to continue into married life batting off suggestions of going there? Thanks. Don't worry about one of Barry's pre-marriage messages. Greg, he says.
Well, I agree with Greg. Look, lots of people enjoy the theatre. I'm not one of them. Greg is another. I've never been to a play that wasn't totally shit. And I've no desire to ever go to another one. The only play I've ever been to that was mildly palatable was one written by Patrick Marber, who's a big Loose FC fan, called Dealer's Choice. But I couldn't enjoy that because the bloke who played Trigger in Only Fools and Horses was in it, but he wasn't playing the role of Trigger. So I'm going, this is ridiculous. Why is he pretending not to be Trigger?
If you're going to cast Trigger, give him a broom, for fuck's sake. It doesn't have a bad left foot, Patrick Marber, in my experience. Anyway, that'll do for today. Thanks, everybody. I've never been to a play that wasn't totally shit. It's very funny. Thank you, Barry.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Seb.
Hamilton's all right, isn't it?
No, I'm not
don't count.
including musicals. I like musicals.
Oh, okay.
Okay. There we go. The caveats begin.
Strictly talking plays.
Okay, I'm with you. Harold Pinter writes in going, I heard the previous part.
Chekhov here. Long time listener, first time caller.
Shakespeare's
when
shit.
Chekhov has a vasectomy. Chekhov says, I was going to write to you about my vasectomy, but I can't now. Anyway, also thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Did I thank you, Seb?
Yeah, thank you.
No, thanks again. Football Weekly is produced by Joel Grove. Our executive producer is Phil Maynard.
This is The Guardian.